let me do a little history. One of the things we have a problem with is this. We have this story in the Bible. But when we look back in history, it's really hard to line up the story with history as we know it for a lot of different reasons. First of all, you didn't have a lot of people writing history down back that long ago. So we do know some things that sound a lot like this story. There's a group of people called the Hyksos. The Hyksos were a group of people that came into Egypt from Canaan, which would become the Promised Land. This group of people became the rulers in Egypt. The Hyksos were the pharaohs and were in charge of everything. And around this time would have been the time that Jacob would have went to Egypt. It's not hard to imagine a Canaanite ruling dynasty feeling kind-hearted or not being threatened by Jacob and his family, or would have allowed Joseph to become in charge of a lot of different things. The Hyksos ruled for a couple hundred years, and at some point later, we know that a ruling dynasty of native Egyptians eventually overthrew the Hyksos. And so native Egyptians took over ruling of the Egyptian kingdom. And sometime later, a couple generations later, there was a migration out of Egypt. It's possible that the Jews left in this migration. Here's the little trick. We also have pictures. You've seen the movies of ancient Egyptians. They often would write in symbols, not letters. We have a relief, a series of pictures up in the northern part of Egypt in the Nile Delta. There is a city that Ramses built, and we have a picture of the workers, and some of the workers were Semitic, which are the Jewish people came from that clan of making bricks. So we have these pictures, these dots on a line that sound a lot like the story, but matching it up year to year becomes difficult. What I just want to say is there are historical reasons to trust this text. Now, we also have the time of Israel and Egypt being labeled as 480 years, which shouldn't shock us, is a derivative of 12. Now, that's way too much for everybody. But I just want to say perhaps that 480 was never meant to be a literal time period anyway. So we have a vast period of time. All this kind of fits together. This story was something from Israel's history. But at another level, this is a story about the very personal life of Joseph. And so I want to take another look at this life, at least as colorful as his Technicolor Dreamcoat. There's a picture somewhere, probably my mom's house, of me in 8th grade being the narrator for some school program. And at that time, remember, it was 1978, I would think, 77 or 78, and I had a blue and red plaid sport coat on. And I thought, I should have that sport coat again for a series on Joseph. My wife would burn it after the first time. But it would be great to see something like that, maybe illustrated. So that's why we're calling this series A Life in Technicolor. I want to read starting, not all of the chapter, but sections of Genesis chapter 37. And it starts off, it tells you right away what we're doing. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wife. And he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, which is Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. But Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And he said to them, "Listen to the dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out of the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." And we wonder why Joseph wasn't liked. So when Joseph came to his brothers, this a few verses later, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern, which is a well. The cistern was empty and there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming down from Gilead. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. That's the start of our story. Joseph was sold into slavery. And let me ask the question, how bad is your life right now? It's a good question. Sometimes in church, I think one of the things we've done in modern culture is maybe turn church into the happy, happy, joy, joy club. You know, you look at a picture of worship or something, it's always a picture of God on the beach with his arms outstretched, the sun is shining, it's that perfect temperature. But life doesn't exist that way. We go through difficult weeks. Sometimes we go through difficult months. There are times we have hard years. I bet there's someone who could say that have a lost decade. And in this part of the country with so many Cubs fans, it's always good to always remind us sometimes you can even have a bad century. That thankfully is over. Life is not always run smoothly. Now, as bad as your life is, Joseph's life worse. We have his picture here. He's tied up. He's with a caravan. He's being led to he doesn't know where. It's better than what was being planned. They were planning to kill him. But one of the brothers felt bad, I think, and said, "Guys, we can't do this. He is our brother. I agree. We got to get rid of him. I can't stand him. But we got to get rid of him. If we sell him, he'll be out of our hair. We'll never see him again. He'll be taken off to somewhere, who knows where, and he'll be out of our lives forever." Now, Joseph was one of 12 brothers. And one of the things we see right now is he had kind of a high opinion of himself. Now, the text tells us right away he's 17. And it's funny how sometimes the highest opinion you ever have of yourself is about that age. When you're 17, you're bulletproof. You know everything. Last night, Michelle and I were having dinner with a couple from Iowa that we didn't know until yesterday. And they happen to be parents of a 13-year-old. And I think my wife said, "Oh, 13, so how's that going?" And the person said, "Well, it's amazing how in the last couple months we've gotten really, really stupid." To her. Lots of eye rolling, lots of harumphing. You know that word, harumphing? It's funny how those ages match up. And Joseph was, I think, a little worse than most people. So he had this dream. And I'm going to unpeel layers of what's going on here as we move through the sermon. And the dream was of his brothers bowing down to him. Now, it's been noted that what Joseph should have done is share that dream with his dad and cultivate the relationship with his brothers. That's what a smart person would have done. That's what anybody with self-awareness would have done. But no, not Joseph. Joseph cultivated the relationship with his dad and told his brothers the dream. And it didn't go well. It seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, one of them. And they said, "That's it. We've had enough. He has got to go." You know the story. But there's something else here. Jacob, the dad, was not the oldest brother himself. And I imagine that by this time, all the sons knew the story of their father. I know people call him Israel now, brothers, but you know what his name used to be, don't you? It used to be Jacob. It used to be deceiver. You know the story, he's not the oldest brother. Well, then how did he get all the birthright? How did he amass all this? Well, let me tell you. He waited till his brother was really, really hungry. And then he wouldn't feed him until he promised him that he would sell him his birthright for a bowl of soup. Sounds like our uncle's stupid. Yes, he is, but that's another story. But then there's another layer. When it came time to give the blessing, even Grandma was a part of this one. Grandma got an old goat skin, put it on his arms because, Uncle Esau, he's kind of hairy. And had Jacob pose as his brother, because Grandpa didn't see very well, and had deceived Grandpa into giving him his birthright. So if our dad would go through all those shenanigans to get that birthright himself, think how willing he's going to be to not give the birthright to the oldest one of us. And it seems like he likes Joseph. We need to get rid of him. In that day, if you were brothers, when it came time, when your dad died, the brothers in the house would split up the inheritance. If you're the sister, you're out of luck. If you're the sister, well, your way of contributing to the family would be the price you paid for the dowry. So if the lovely Abby was my daughter, I would say, hey, it's time for Abby to be married off. And by the way, that would be about age 15 in the Jewish world, about the time you're able to bear children, that's what time. And you would say, time for my daughter, who can pay me the highest bride price for her? And everybody would start to bid. And they would say, we'll give you 8 goats for Abby. And I would go, absolutely not. Abby is a 10-goat girl if she's anything. And I'd hold off until finally I got the price. 10 goats, and they throw in a chicken. That's the kicker. And Abby's off getting married. But the sons got to split up all the stuff. And the oldest got a double share. Only because it's kind of easy doing my head a little bit. If there's 10 sons, the oldest would get a little less than, you get something like little less than $20,000, and all the other 9 brothers would get a little less than $10,000. As the oldest brother in my family, I love that system. So just think, they're thinking, this Joseph, there's no way he's going to get our stuff. We'll sell him into slavery. But how did it get this bad? How did the relationship get this strained? Well, it all starts with the mother. If you go back to this story, this is more than about brothers being a little jealous of each other. These are brothers that didn't all have the same mom. You remember the story? Their dad, Jacob, he met this beautiful girl named Rachel. And the text describes her as lovely. And he goes, I want to marry her. But that day you had to marry off the oldest daughter first. And so it came time for the wedding day, and the daughter came out probably in all her veils and married Jacob. And after the wedding, they went back to the tent, and he unpeeled the veil, and it's the oldest sister, which the text does not describe as lovely. And so now Jacob had to wait a week, and I think it was just a week, to marry the one he wanted, and then he had to promise to work for his father-in-law for 7 years for that right. But here's the thing that started to happen. It wasn't Rachel. This was a different day. It was common for the powerful people to have multiple wives. God would deal with Israel further for this. And it clearly states in the text, Rachel he loved and Leah he hated. Now that doesn't mean he despised her emotionally. It means she did not have the favored position within the family. Rachel had the favored position. The problem is Rachel wasn't bearing any children. Leah was. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4 oldest. And Rachel couldn't. So on that day, what they would do, Rachel goes, I can't, and this was culturally acceptable. Here's my servant. She gets pregnant once, twice. Leah gets jealous. her servant, 7, 8, and then Leah again, 9, 10. That's 6 of the 10 are Leah's, 2 of the 10 are Leah's servant, the other 2 are Rachel's servants. Can I tell you something? That's a lot of jealousy. Now, I don't know what life is like now. Maybe Ben will tell me, and maybe Jacob can tell me at some point. But when I was about their age, 4th grade, 5th grade, up to even probably about high school, it stopped. The big thing in the late 70s in our playground was your mama jokes. Your mama is so ugly. She wasn't hit with the ugly stick. She fell out of the top of the tree and hit every branch on the way down. That's what we would do. Your mama's so fat that when she sits around the house, she sits around the house. And boy, when your mama wears combat boots, we did all kinds of stuff. I don't know why that was, but I remember that one going around. And people would get so upset that they'd start to fight on the playground because you said something about their mama. That's in this story. Finally, after all these 10 other children, when Jacob was rather older, Rachel finally gets pregnant, and the firstborn is Joseph. Now, in that day, often, the oldest son of the favored wife would usurp the birthright from the oldest son of the hated wife. That's in the mix. And by the way, later on in Deuteronomy chapter 21, I think, you can read it, Israel, the law tried to fix that and said even if the son of the loved wife does not usurp the birthright from the older son of the hated wife. That's in Deuteronomy. So it's like Israel's like, oh, we got to fix this, what Jacob was doing. And they put that in the law in Deuteronomy. So you have all this jealousy. Then let me add another layer. In Genesis chapter 33, you remember, Jacob and Esau really didn't like each other because Jacob got the birthright. Esau felt kind of bad. And then there was the story after Jacob wrestled with the angel. He was wanted to go reconcile with his brother, but he was really afraid that his brother would do nothing but kill everybody. So he sent everybody in the household ahead of him, and he stayed in the back. And if you read Genesis 33, he sent all the other brothers out front with Leah, while Rachel and Joseph stayed behind. Don't think the brothers didn't remember that. And then Joseph was something else. The very first thing we read in 37, Joseph gave their father a bad report about what they had done. Now, there's a word for good report and bad report in Hebrew. This is the word for bad report, and then they put the word bad in front of it. So it's like a double bad report. It's like if you said, man, I had a great week at work. I got a commendation from the boss. Oh, fantastic. If you came to me and said, boy, rough week, I got a reprimand at work. See, I know that's bad. But then if you said, I got a bad reprimand. See, that's a double. This is what this word is. Joseph was a tattletale. And his brothers knew it. When we see Joseph trying to find his brothers, it says they were tending their fields quite a distance away. Joseph's brothers were trying to stay away from him. And Joseph had this dream about everybody bowing down to him. And his brothers are trying to avoid him. And Joseph said, I got to find my brothers. I got to tell them about my dream. I got to find them. But see, after the report, Jacob made Joseph a coat. A lot of scholars think the coat wasn't made a whole lot of different colors, but maybe just 2 colors. In that day, everything usually was the same. Maybe this was a coat divided into 2 different colors, what would have marked him out. If you ever look on an airport or an aircraft carrier, there's people wearing different colors. The deck boss wears one color. The people that start the plane wear one color. The people that put the bombs on the plane wear another color. The people that gas up the plane have another color. Colors represent something. A lot of people think the coat meant, brothers, this is the boss. And one of those brothers might have been 40, 43, 44, and here's 17-year-old Joseph in his coat that marked him out as distinct. And they didn't want to see him, but he found him. Guys, I got to tell you, there's something so exciting happened to me. I had this dream. Let me tell you about this dream. I had this dream, and all of you bowed down to me. See my coat? And they said, yeah, we see your coat. And they threw him in the cistern. You read the story. They took the coat, and once he was sold, they put animal's blood on it to take it back to Jacob and say, look, your brother Joseph, your son Joseph has been killed. And we think, this is evidence for the story. Yes, it is. But don't think for a second that there's not some other subtext here. Hey, Dad, you see this coat that you got, Joseph? Let me tell you what you can do with this coat. Here it is. There's anger. One can almost feel the tension. So there's some other thing that's happening. I wanted just a couple lessons from this story. First one is, God does not plan our bad. When we read the story, there's nothing in this story at all that God gave Joseph a dream. Or God sent the caravan to sell him into slavery. There's nothing in the story about God being behind it, God sending the dream, God causing all these events to happen. There's no hint of it. Sometimes we think even today, everything's going good. Oh yes, that's fine. But as soon as we have a bunch of struggle, boy, there must be something wrong. God has an issue with me. That nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the New Testament takes the opposite position. Consider it pure joy when you go through struggles. Because sometimes when we're struggling is when we're closest to Christ. In fact, at the end of the story, which we'll get to next month, there's this phrase, what you intended for harm, God used for good. There was no mention God planned in the beginning. What you brothers planned to do, God turned it into something good. Without that test, without being tried, which we'll hear about next week, Joseph would not have been able to rule as wisely. Without faithfulness, Joseph would have just languished at some other role in life. But these other lessons are most important. Your current situation, your current status, your job or lack of a job, or money or lack of money, has nothing to do with whether God can use you. Your history, your personality, your traits do not disqualify you from grace, nor does how much or how little you are liked. Oh, I think if you're liked, you can probably use more. But I think we'd also see that Joseph changed. The guy we see at the end of the story has a whole lot more self-awareness than the Joseph we see here at the beginning of the story. And the Joseph at the beginning of the story had almost no self-awareness. We see a pampered, entitled, arrogant, egotistical, self-centered, self-involved 17-year-old. So here's 3 lessons. First, God does not send some pre-planned problems into your life just to teach you lessons. Life has enough lessons on its own. Rather, God often can use difficulties for a larger purpose. In fact, some of the difficulties you're experiencing right now might be uniquely preparing you for something you can't imagine 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Second thing, there will be people in life who act against you and make life difficult for you. That's not a shocker. This is part of life, so don't be surprised when it happens. You're not going through anything that other people don't routinely. Last one. maybe the most important. If God can use a self-centered, egotistical, arrogant, self-involved jerk like Joseph, well, maybe there's room for me. Maybe there's room for me.